Welcome to Inside Marketing with MarketSurge, your front row seat to the boldest ideas and smartest strategies in the marketing game. Your host is Reed Hansen, Chief Growth Officer at MarketSurge.
Hello and welcome back to Inside Marketing with MarketSurge. Today's guest is someone who's seen advertising from just about every angle. I'm joined by Skip Wilson, the CEO of Draft Media Partners. Skip got his start in advertising at 16 years old as a copywriter, which, as the story goes, started as a way to impress a girl and turned into a lifelong career. From there, he moved into web design, entrepreneurship, and eventually into the heart of digital media, working on CNN's iReport team and helping build new platforms from the ground up. He went on to play a key role in building the digital division at Clear Channel Radio, later spent more than a decade as vice president of digital media at iHeartMedia, where he saw firsthand how advertising really performs at scale. Today, Skip is the founder and CEO of Draft Media Partners, as I mentioned before. This is an advertising execution company serving over 100 clients across multiple locations. Skip is also the best-selling author and host of the Advertising Podcast, where he's known for cutting through bad ads, bad assumptions, and bad marketing advice. Skip, welcome to Inside Marketing with MarketSurge.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I want to hear the story about how you started as a copywriter at age 16. That's pretty early, and I understand that there were some ulterior motives for taking the job, and I'd love to hear about how that started and how that led to your career.
Absolutely. I wanted to be like a writer, right? And so I was to impress this girl, who's now my wife, by the way. But to impress this girl, I was like, oh, yeah. She was like, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a writer. But then when we started actually dating, I had to make good on that, right? So I had to find writing jobs. Of course, aren't a ton of those. Where I am is right between Charlotte and Atlanta. So there's actually a lot of ad agencies here. And so I just started shopping around, and it was actually fairly easy to get freelance work. You're that young as a copywriter because every agency, you're always looking for something that's cool and new and unique, like when you're an ad agency. So it was relatively easy to get a couple of gigs. And then once you get that, you start building a resume and portfolio and stuff. And so one thing turned to another, and that's how it happened.
Interesting.
So that's how the web design thing happened too. They were like, hey, you're young. Do you know how to do a web design? And I at first said no, because I didn't. And then they were like, but it pays $5,000 for this thing, which at that time was like an unbelievable amount of money to me. And so I was like, yeah, I'll figure it out. Give me a couple of weeks.
Awesome.
Bought a book on WordPress, and then boom, now I'm in web design. So that's what I stumbled into the industry.
Do you have any early lessons from that first job, first gig that have paid off today in today's world of marketing and advertising?
Yeah, I would say that some of the things I learned are, one, you should never say you can do something if you can't, right? It was one lesson I learned from that. But the other side of that is, I think there's also a fear of, we worry about project scope creep and those types of things a lot, as we always should, because we should always fight against those things. But at the same time, there is something to be said about just saying yes to every opportunity that comes that way. There's certain doors that open up, and being more open. There's both sides. Obviously, I was wrong at that time to be like, yeah, I can do this website having no experience. But at the same time, I did successfully deliver a website. We should always just be cautious on both ends of those. We should worry about scope creep. We should worry about saying yes to things outside of our wheelhouse. But at the same time, we should always be growing our wheelhouse, right?
Yeah, no,
both things.
That's awesome. So now, you moved on to opportunities at Clear Channel, CNN, iHeartMedia, very big platforms, big spend on advertising. What is something that, maybe a small business owner might not understand about how this scales? Like, how does advertising work when you're dealing with 6-7 figure budgets?
The biggest difference is that you have longer payoff times. In other words, if you're doing a campaign that's a 7-figure campaign for an established brand, they don't necessarily need that to make an immediate return on ad spend. So I would say that's the biggest difference. If you are a 5-location roofing company, you need it to pay off really that month. You can't necessarily wait 2 years before you get payoff. That I would say is the biggest difference, is that when you do have the ability to think in a longer time horizon, it just allows you to get more creative and establish a brand. Whereas branding at a local level with smaller budgets, more difficult. Also, there's some categories that I just don't think branding matters that much. I know that might not be the greatest thing to say, but I don't necessarily need to be in love with my HVAC company, right? I just need them to come in and do a good job and then get out, right? And so there are some industries that are more inherently where brand is more important than others.
Interesting. Okay. So maybe for, smaller brands with smaller budgets, essentially avoid the massive effort into brand building, identity building, and more just being present, being found at the right time and by the right people.
Exactly.
No, I think that's pretty useful advice, actually, because we do look at the fundamentals often and we think like, well, we want them to feel something when they see our brand. But it's probably not with a 4-figure budget or a 3-figure budget. You don't want to bother with that. So.
Correct. Exactly. At the smaller scale, you just want to make sure that if you're putting $1 in, you're getting $3 out, and immediately too, at least within the same year. You can't wait 2 or 3 years before you get that $3 back.
Yeah. Okay. So, data is obviously important, and when we're talking about looking at advertising, these are massive spends, massive budget items. Why do you think that, well, and I guess maybe tell us your experience, like when you're working with these large campaigns, are you finding that they are effectively using data? Is that working better at scale, or, what's been your experience with that?
So data is something, I honestly think data is almost more important when you have a smaller budget than it is when you have a larger budget. Larger brands, a lot of times, will do stuff just to look cool. I mean, if you see a Coca-Cola billboard or something that's a publicly traded company, a lot of times they are sponsoring that event for shareholder values and those types of things that aren't necessarily designed to get an immediate return on ad spend. And when you are doing those kinds of things, the data you care about is the vanity metrics and the stuff that doesn't matter to any quote unquote normal business or not publicly traded business. So I would actually say that data is more valuable and more important for more immediate ROAS campaigns. And the most important data is, in my opinion, I look at every ad campaign almost like you're trying to build a machine where you're trying to get it to do this thing. And if it's not doing it, just like if a printer isn't printing, the first thing you're going to do is the computer talking to the printer. Sure. Is the printer getting the electricity? Is all these different things? So you break it up into parts. And that's the way we should be looking at campaigns too. Is the ad getting good engagement? If so, it's probably not the fault that it's not converting. Let's look at the landing page. And then is the landing page getting good engagement but not actually converting? If so, then we've got a copy issue or a target audience issue.
Okay.
And so when you start to look at those things, it becomes actually fairly easy to fix a broken campaign. I always think in terms of 2-week chunks. And if you think in terms of 2-week chunks, then it usually becomes pretty apparent. Okay, they're getting from here to here, but this is where it's dying, and they're not getting from here to here.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Do you feel like, how are our tools? Like, is AI helping us in this space, like to analyze data better? Is it a distraction from getting more precision here, or what do you think?
So it's making organic a lot more difficult.
Okay.
Like organic is, I would say, where it's changing things the most right now, because I think that the last month there was a record number of social media posts. And that's probably going to be true every month, like for a while, because it's a lot easier to automate those sort of like run-of-the-mill posts and those types of things. And so because of that, follower counts and those types of things don't matter as much. So if anything, it increases the importance of paid advertising, because otherwise it's very hard. If I had a company that I was trying to get found through my blog, it's going to be very difficult for me starting a new blog right now, because it's so easy to start a blog. Every website's going to have the content. And because of that, Google, I think wisely, is paying as much attention to those things because it doesn't matter as much. And so that's the biggest change that I think AI has made. In the paid ad space, definitely you should be using it to help you summarize and look at reports. So if you're getting a marketing report and you're like, I don't even know what this means, definitely use your ChatGPT friend to like help you discern those things. And those things, but also too great for headline variations. It's much easier now to do. There's really no excuse not to be running at least 5 to 10 different ad copies right now, because it's just never been easier to split those things up.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So, you talked about some other things like landing pages and things like that. Do you have a framework or kind of rule of thumb of what a business needs to have in place before they start spending on ads? Is that a fair way to think about it?
Yeah.
Like table stakes, and then we're ready for ads.
I do, actually. Yeah, I've got I think in terms of math on everything.
I love it.
So I actually do have this framework, which I'll spare anyone having to zoom in on this. I didn't come up with this part of it, but I came up with the second part of it. The first part of it, the people, process, and product, like you need to have those things in place first. And what this little equation is people plus product plus process in parentheses and then multiplied by distribution. Distribution is what advertising helps with, getting the word out, getting your message distributed. But if you don't already have a clear product offering, if you don't already have a clear idea of who your customer is and who you're engaging with, and you don't have a clear way to fulfill those things, you really shouldn't be running ads.
Okay.
We have done campaigns before where we've generated leads and then we go, hey, how is the lead quality on this campaign? And then they're like, we haven't called them yet because we don't have XYZ in place. And I'm like, yeah, you shouldn't have been running ads.
Yeah, right.
And so those things, if you've got a clear product offering and a clear idea of who your customer is, then I think you can start looking at doing some sort of paid.
Okay. Interesting. Now, confession here, we run ads, but for our specific business, I've actually turned off ads for my business. Even though we're running ads on behalf of many of our clients, we stopped it for advertising MarketSurge, the agency. I was just finding that the cost per acquisition was pretty high. And so I turned. Now, in general, if a business comes to you and says, I'm not feeling like ads are right for my business, they just don't work for my business, what are things that you might say to them?
So I will say, first of all, B2B service is the hardest type of lead gen there is.
All right,
so
thanks.
Yeah, exactly. So you're in a safe space. It is also an industry though where you can hold usually a higher customer acquisition cost. In other words, you could probably hold a $500 acquisition cost or something, whereas in a lot of industries, when we're working with a sandwich company, which we have a couple of sandwich franchisees, they can't have a $500 customer acquisition cost because it would take quite some time to pay that off.
Right.
But that is when I think of advertising as a specific message to a specific audience to achieve some specific result. And that really works for every industry. So it's always trying to figure out who is my audience and what am I trying to get them to do? And then what do I need to say to them? And so for you, let's pretend that I was doing ads for MarketSurge. I would actually almost encourage figuring out who your target audience is and then running ads of people to apply to be a part of the podcast and that be your customer acquisition. Because then you're spending an hour with people. Yeah. You're appealing to their ego, which CEOs and business owners and those things, it's much easier than asking for an appointment to talk about their business.
Right.
And then now you're building up a list of contacts. Because obviously if they're applying to be part of a podcast, they want exposure and those types of things. So it self-qualifies and then you can work those leads.
Absolutely.
So it's just being creative in those. I think you've got two levers. You've got the message, and so those are you're the only two levers to advertising. And so tweaking those two things to get that result, you can do that for anything.
Yeah. No, that's great. I appreciate that. Now, I've seen this phrase pop up in your writing, draft mentality. So you use that phrase a lot. What does it actually mean in practice, and how does it change how a brand might approach their advertising? Help get us
the idea. The idea of a draft mentality is the idea that it's never finished. When we start an ad campaign, I feel like a lot of times when someone comes to us with a need for, let's say it's a roofing company and they need 30 leads, we put together the campaign based off of industry standards and those types of things, and we are able to predict for a $2,500 budget, this should be how many leads you should get. This is how many of those should convert to paying customers. But that's always based off of industry, like something performing at the 50th percentile. Usually when you start a campaign, it's not going to perform at the 50th percentile. It's going to perform below that because it's new. Right. And so I think a lot of times as marketers, we get nervous about being upfront about that because we give this, we're the experts, we should know, right? But the reality is that it just takes a few rounds of guessing and tweaks to get something to where it is performing average and then above average. It's not like it takes months. It should take about 4 to 6 weeks, but still that's the draft mentality, the idea that it's always willing to change and push new things and being willing to go, I think this platform let's swap out this platform. Let's move it over here. We wanted to build, when we were building Draft, we wanted to make sure that we were platform agnostic so that we didn't have a preference for traditional over digital or one thing over another, so that we could always plug and play and move things around without it benefiting us more in one area than the other. And that's the Draft idea.
Okay.
The idea that it's always could be improving.
No, I think that's wise. And, you make an excellent point. I've been in that situation so much, like new client, we're trying to make an impact early, but like advertising does not lend to that hardly at all. Like we need a few iterations of learning, even if it's just a few days, we need some data, but data only happens when we do or publish.
Right.
And so, I think that's great. So that's a really good insight. So you also do software development, and you've won some awards for software development. Where do you see certain tools or services falling short, and what do you think that businesses and brands should really demand from their tech stack?
So our software that we built, we originally launched as a SaaS, was let's build this advertising predictive tool where you say, hey, I've got this target audience and these 5 zip codes or whatever, and here's our budget. And it would predict out, the cost per lead, and here's what the media mix should be in that market with that audience and so forth. The idea was we would sell that to agencies, and that would be the business.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's the missing piece. All that information exists out there, but there wasn't like the clear, clean piece. But then what we actually learned was that they actually needed help too with hands on keyboard to actually run the ads. And so we pivoted to being ad fulfillment.
Okay. Great.
But we still very much use our draft predictive tool in almost every way. But one of the biggest changes that we've made to it is that the first version of it, AI existed, but we didn't have access to AI when we first built the tool. So what we've done now is just put a chat on top of it, so that whereas it used to take us about 30 minutes to map out a campaign, now you can just talk to it and it will spit out. It will give you the answers. That's one of the biggest ways that our tool has changed, is just putting AI into the mix so that you don't have to spend 30 minutes. It was very much like Figma, where you'd have to pull over a landing page and then it would run the math to figure out what the conversion rate likely is and all those different things. Now it just does all that instantaneously.
That's awesome.
So faster and easier, I would say, is the biggest changes. But
okay. Awesome.
In tech stack world, attribution for things like our other tool basically takes ad logs and exposed IP addresses, and then we match those to physical addresses.
Okay.
And then we pair that with website data, where when someone says yes to sharing their location, we're able to put those two things together. So for that, you can get ad attribution for even things like OTT and those types of things, because they saw the ad in the household and then that person became a customer. It allows us to do attribution on things that you otherwise, normally very hard to, because you can't click a Hulu ad and those things.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, second to last question.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us a hard truth about advertising that most business owners would not want to hear, but really need to.
It goes with the draft mentality, which is that it's all a guess. No matter how, even when you're dealing, like we have several clients that are franchises, even if it's the same concept, the same franchise, just different locations, you're getting a little better at being able to predict, and a little bit better what works, but every market is different and every location's a little different. So even when it's that similar, you're still taking a guess.
Yeah.
That's why I always say your first 2 weeks, you're probably not going to be, it's probably going to perform a little below average. That's the hard truth no matter what, because you are ultimately guessing that I think this is the message to who we think the audience is, to get them to do the thing that we think we want them to do. But all of those things are guesses.
Well, awesome. So Skip, you have a good way of explaining things. I think this is going to be a very clippable podcast, which I'm happy about. Can you tell us, if people would like to learn more, work with you, or just talk to you, where are the best places to find you?
Yeah, so I'm like a curmudgeon as far as social media for the most part. The best way to reach out to me personally is just email Skip at either draftmediapartners.com or draftadvertising.com.
Great.
Both go to me. And then through our website.
Great. Awesome. Well, I will include the link in the comments, the show notes, and I'd recommend reaching out to Skip. Obviously, like a lot of great resources here, a lot of knowledge, and both at scale and at the small and medium-sized business level. So this has been a great podcast. Thanks so much for coming on, Skip.
Yeah.
Want to stay ahead of what's actually working in marketing right now? Head over to MarketSurge.io and see how we're helping businesses grow smarter, faster, and louder. That's MarketSurge.io, because your next breakthrough shouldn't be a guess.